Welcome to a Leader's Journey podcast. I'm your host, Joel Gunn. I've got Dr. Brent Fessler back with me again.
Hello.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
And also thank you for being my guest host on a couple of episodes.
You're welcome. You obviously haven't looked at them yet.
Well, I kind of did. I saw one of them in post-production, but I haven't watched it yet. But I will. So
Thanks for trusting me with that. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, hopefully you'll get to come back and do some more of those in future months. So just before the show, though, we were talking about your expertise, your degree, your experience out in the marketplace is really centered. Your research is centered around adult character formation, and myself included. Most people, I think, would say, no, you're pretty much who you are by the time you're 3, right? And I'm sure there's some truth to that. But what's the difference? Like, what's happening up to you're 3 or 5 years old, and what's this idea of adult character formation? What's the difference?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly true that our young years are very formative. Those are very important years, and our mind and our brain is the most elastic at those points. But it doesn't mean that goes completely away. And so, just because it may be harder to form habits as an adult, I don't believe that it's completely harder. I think we have some advantages as adults in changing our character and improving our character. And so I think that's where I would start, is acknowledging, yes, it is easier when we're young, as parents, as educators. It's very, very important what we do with our children, what they see, what they practice, the modeling that they see in others, and that type of thing. So that is absolutely important, but it doesn't mean that adults cannot develop character. And I think the research, fortunately, the research that I did in my doctoral work pans that out.
And some of what we are born with is innate, right? Some of our personality, character traits, and so on. What are you talking about when you say adult character formation? Yeah,
so I define character now as the congruence between the way we behave and our mindset, the way we're thinking and we're behaving. How congruent is that with our identity, who we know we're supposed to be, what we believe in? I think pretty universally we all believe integrity is important. Doesn't mean that we always have integrity. So I think we also we see similarities in the physical space. If somebody has 2 legs, they can walk, they can run. It doesn't mean that they are Olympic runners. And so, yes, some people may be born with some tendencies in the physical space, naturally stronger, naturally taller, or things like that. Doesn't mean that we can't improve and expand our capacities in the physical space. Knowledge, clearly, right? We know we can learn and grow, but character, some of these traits, we can learn to be more aware and develop them, even if we have some natural tendencies in, to be, thinking creatively. It doesn't mean that I can't also learn the discipline of being very task-oriented and being focused to go through those things. Mm-hmm. So I think understanding our tendencies, but not being defined by our tendencies, knowing how to leverage those and use those as strengths, but not be limited by those. And I think it's a fallacy. It's a lie to believe that I'm born just the way I am, or born where I was, born in a certain way, and that's why I'm stuck. I think it's a trap to believe that way. And not that we have to become somebody else, but I think the research shows that we can always aspire to be something better. And I think character, under that definition, if we have this ideal self of who we're supposed to be. And I would also say this is true for an organization. So pretty much anything I talk about is true for an individual or an organization. If you have an ideal, we will never get to the point where we're always that. We're always going to fall short at some point. I believe that losing my temper is wrong, right? Every day of the week, every minute of the day, I can tell you I believe it is wrong. Does that mean I have gotten to the place where I will never lose my temper? No. But I can keep improving on that. Even if I have this natural bent to losing my temper, I can grow and consistently get better at that. But only if I'm aware that, one, that's important to me, two, how much am I losing my temper, and three, what are some tools and to close that loop and get better at that.
Is that why you said it a few minutes ago? In some ways, it's easier for adults because we can be aware. And we can be intentional, whereas as a 3-year-old, you're just kind of going with the flow. And
that's right. Yeah, our self-awareness, just in the young age and with the younger mind, or without working at it, our self-awareness is usually pretty low. That's one of the keys to the whole field of emotional intelligence is first awareness. It's also a key in the concept of metacognition. Metacognition is a really important concept to improving our character, and metacognition is two things. It's first being aware of my thoughts. I love quoting Squints Palladores from The Sandlot, because he famously said in the Sandlot movie, he's like, if you were thinking, you wouldn't have thought that. And, because I thought, no, if you were actually thinking, you wouldn't have been thinking that. And so metacognition is that. We're kind of stepping back, kind of stepping outside of ourselves, observing, what am I thinking? What am I saying? What am I doing? And getting outside of ourselves. And sometimes we have to rely on other people for that. But once you're aware, and as an engineer, this is akin to a feedback loop or a control feedback loop, where you've got an ideal setting and you've got an actual measurement, and then that feeds back in, and you've got a control circuit that's going to turn the air conditioner on or turn the heater on, right, if the temperature doesn't match what you're supposed to be. And so we're effectively doing that as an individual. I've got my ideal. What is my actual? How are people experiencing me? How am I observing myself? And then figuring out how to close that loop better. But as soon as we identify with, no, I'm a failure, well, then that control loop doesn't work anymore. It's like, see, I told you I was a failure. And now we do nothing to change that part of our character. So, yeah.
How do I become more self-aware?
Well, so becoming more self-aware, this is like the first step in any 12-step problem. You got to admit you have a problem, right? So if you're not aware that you have a problem, you're never going to move towards changing it. And so there's some. I know there's this weird cycle. What comes first? I have to have some character traits of humility, I think, first of all, to start going down this path of self-awareness, because there's some fear and anxiety to discovering, you know what? I kind of hope that I'm this person, and I don't want to discover that I'm somebody else, or I want to ignore that I'm somebody else. So I think embracing this humility and pursuing that. If you go to the doctor and you never put the hospital gown on, well, they never can examine you. Or you never do share, hey, this is bothering me, here's a symptom that I have, and letting the doctor do some examination. So there's the humility, you look at yourself in the mirror, but I think we only have eyes on the front of our head, so it also includes bringing in some close friends. And so bring in some close, trusted friends. And if you don't have any close, trusted friends, just find somebody and just be, get some feedback on somebody who's observing you. So I actually use that in the way that I conducted the research in adult character formation. I did a mixed methods approach. I have a couple of instruments that try to give feedback on how much somebody was using their values in their decision-making process, and how much some different character traits they felt were changing over time. But then I also did a couple of qualitative investigations where we interviewed participants in a character development program, and they would talk about two things. One, has this particular value or this character trait, become more important or less important to you? And second, do you feel like you've changed much? And third, when do you feel like you did grow over the course of the program that we were studying? Describe some instances where you felt like you grew in this particular thing. So it's like integrity or stewardship or service, being agile. Those were the specific traits in that particular study. And then, though, we didn't just leave the qualitative there, we also talked to a close relationship, a spouse, a parent, best friend, and we would ask them very similar questions. What have you seen change regarding this particular trait in this particular participant? So not only did we have an individual self-assessment of whether their integrity grew or not, but then we had this close relationship perspective on how they observed things change over the course of that program. So what have you seen? You're not in the program yourself, just what have you observed in the individual?
When you're interviewing those people, did they usually have a higher or lower assessment perception of how much they'd changed?
It varied. So there was certainly some disagreement, which is interesting, and it seemed that some of it had to do with how moral the particular value was. And so when we would talk about something like leadership, that was a value in that particular framework of character. The participant was very open to say, yes, I've grown in my leadership, or I've grown in my service or my communication. There's not a lot of morality in that. It's a little bit more amoral. It's a character-oriented thing. But things like integrity, the individual seemed to be more reluctant to say that I've grown in my integrity, because it sort of implies that I didn't have integrity before. Mm-hmm. However,
or that I'm not humble.
Right. However, the close relationships are very quick to say, no, I can trust this person so much more now. I've known them for decades. Something's different over the last 9 months, and give examples of that. So that was kind of interesting to see that disagreement there, and that's at least a theory on why there was some disagreement where, in some instances, the participant underrated their growth, and the close relationship gave, I would say, a more accurate picture of growth in a particular area.
So let's say I'm somebody that's viewing or listening to this podcast, and just in the last few minutes, you've already got my attention. I want to make a change. I know, maybe I'm not fully self-aware, but I know something's got to be different. Yeah. What's that path look like? Is there science, or is there methodologies that would somebody could head in a direction and know they're going to have some positive change?
Yeah. Well, I think first I'd like to say one of the reasons why I pursued adult character formation was I found in the literature there's hardly any research on adult character formation. There's only a few institutions doing it. Our military is one of them. There's plenty of K-12 character development, character formation articles and research studies and things like that, and programs out there, but there's not a lot in the adult side, and so I found a space that could be really valuable and contribute to the rest of academia and contribute to in businesses. And so in my particular study, 4 themes emerged on basically effective approaches to developing character or forming character. And I think they'll make sense as we go through them. The first is we need a clear framework. We need to define what character is or what our values are. And so there's a lot of synonyms here. I need to know, me personally, if I haven't articulated what my mission is or my purpose to be on the planet, even if it's general, but even better if it's very specific, I'm going to have a hard time pursuing that. If it's just this vague kind of thing, I'm not going to tend to put a lot of energy into pursuing that as much. So it makes sense that we need to have a clear articulation of things like our personal mission or our corporate mission on the corporate side, our values, our purpose. And I've got different definitions for all of those. And in the research, some of the responses were like this. They would say, well, integrity has always been important to me, but now that I know what it is, I've been able to focus on it more. They would say things like that. Because, yeah, I sort of know what integrity is, but they've really had never defined it. This is what integrity is. It's doing the right thing when nobody's watching, or if it's deserved. So you put these specific, clear definitions to who our ideal self really is. And it's important to do that. I think people of faith, and we see this over history. We've seen in the Greek, old Greek culture, or Judeo-Christian traditions, or Eastern traditions, they all have a set of values or virtues. And the reason why you have a set of virtues or values is because we want to aspire to those. If we don't, people don't naturally become those things. It's like, just because you put a mountain, in front of you, you're not going to naturally go and climb the mountain. You have to have some sort of vision or desire to get up there. And so, having a clear framework is nothing new, but there are many levels of clarity on it. We know compassion's important, but have we ever stopped to define it? And in the Christian tradition, there's in Paul's letter to the church at Corinth, in chapter 3, 1 Corinthians 3, there's this great expansion of what love is. And so that's a great example of where Jesus, as an example, said, if you love God and love your neighbors yourself, that is the short list of virtues that you should have, is love. If you do love, all the behaviors are going to follow, if you know how to love. Well, Paul recognized, hey, we need a little bit more definition. And so he said, love is this. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not jealous. Love is not boastful. It's not proud or rude. So there's plenty of love is this and love is not this. We call those examples and non-examples. It rejoices in the truth. It never gives up, endures through every circumstance. All these things about what love is, and now we've got a lot more definition of what love is, and so now we can use that a little bit more practically to say this is actually a more clear picture. You can think of when I look out of the corner of my eye at you over here, I can tell that there's a person over here. I can tell your shirt is kind of pink or whatever color this is. Right?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, so it's a light maroon, burgundy, light pink thing.
Yes.
Yes. Right. So I can see that, but I can't really tell that it's you until I turn and focus. And so I think our identity, our values are like that. We kind of have this vague understanding, sort of what's good. Yes, it's right. But we need to go and focus on it more and get more clear. These are my values. This is my mission. So having that clear framework is the first one. The second one that came up in the research is modeling, and we see this both in young people and in adults. So you would say this would tend to be a kid's kind of a thing. I model, or I follow a model. I have an adult, I respect them, they're a parent, they're a teacher, whatever. I'm going to mimic their behavior. Well, it turns out that's not just a youth or an adolescent or a kid thing to do. Adults do it all the time as well. And these things go together. So when I have this framework, this is who, and this happens in our businesses, we have this framework of our values, our core values. Well, what's the first thing an employee is going to do? Do I see the CEO doing that? Do I see my manager living these things out? And if I see them not living them out, now my trust level goes down. Like, hey, we say we're this, but we're actually this. And so for an individual, for an organization, that modeling is important. I've got a clear framework, then I need to find somebody who is modeling that well, and I can now mimic them, see what they're doing, what did it take for them to do that, and so that's so framework, modeling. The third is practical application, right? So I've learned it, I've seen somebody else do it. Now I get an opportunity to go do it in the real world. And so, with our kids, we get to tell them to do that. Hey, you're going to go play a game, or you're going to school. Don't give up. Remember, love never gives up. Or remember this, right? We give them this opportunity. You're going into the real world. You're trying something out. And remember to try to work on this particular value. Benjamin Franklin, in his autobiography, he has his own set of values in there.
13, right?
13 of them, yep. And so he's got this set of values in there, and he had his own little scorecard. And so he'd be focused on one of them at a time. Like this week, no matter what I'm doing, I'm going to be focused on cleanliness was one of his virtues. And so he has this big long list. So he was focused on implementing or improving or strengthening one of these at any given time. And so that was the third kind of factor. And then the fourth one, we talked about that feedback loop before. I think it's an element of learning and growth that we often forget, and that's reflection. It's journaling. Somehow this is what happened, and what did happen. How did I grow? How did I change? How can I learn from that? Or how can I lock in what did happen there? And it's a form of rest. I like to call it a form of rest. You know, when we learn something, so much of what we learn gets locked in while we're sleeping, while we're dreaming. After we work out, so much of the strength comes in the way that we recover. If we don't recover well, if we don't rest well, we lose a lot of the growth. We lose a lot of the strength. And so that reflection is an important part then of that character growth. So those four things, framework, modeling, practical application, and reflection. Yeah.
Is there a tool or a resource that the audience could get a hold of to kind of guide them through the process?
That's a great question. I run, my wife and I run workshops, both for companies and for individuals. So we call them Purpose-Built Retreat, where we help individuals learn these principles, and we'll do that with companies with their entire workforce, which is a blast. It is, because it's not the kind of workshop that people generally get inside the workplace. And so we get to go through a lot of what we just talked about. We get to go through some of the essentials of who we are and what goes into a good identity statement, and making sure that our identity is nice and deep. And then we do some coaching along with that. We used to not do coaching. We just give everybody the tools. Here's a workshop. Here's the tools. And in our experience, hardly anybody was following through with crafting a mission statement. And if you think about it, there's a lot of experience that goes into crafting something like that. It's like writing a song. How many people can sing a song? Pretty much anybody. Right, I can tell you I like a song. I love a song.
Sing it well or not's another thing.
That's right. You may not sing it well, but it can, it can still be powerful to you. But much fewer people can actually write a good song, and so helping somebody look back, reflect, and hear some of the essential elements of their identity, their purpose, their values. That takes some expertise to hear those things and find some great, strong words. I think a lot of people can write ineffective mission statements that may be accurate, but they're not like, I can write a song and it's accurate enough, but it just doesn't hit any emotions, maybe doesn't rhyme, doesn't have any good rhythm to it. And for it to really hit the emotions and hit the heart and be one of the things that you can't get out of your mind, it's got to have some strong words. It's got to, it can't just be accurate. It has to also be emotional. It has to hit the heart, and slice through those layers. So getting to that kind of a personal mission statement or a corporate mission statement, for that matter, I think it's really good to have a coach, have somebody on the outside listening, and providing some of that feedback.
If somebody was looking for a coach, obviously they could find you,
right,
or your wife. But if they were looking for a coach, what kind of questions would they interview that coach to find out if they understand some of what you just shared?
Well, I'm going to be really biased with some of these questions, but I think asking about how important a personal identity is, and asking how they would approach building one of those mission statements. One of my critiques of the mission statements. So I ask this question in all the workshops. I always lead off asking, how many of you in this workshop have a personal mission statement already? And in our experience, less than 5% of the people already have a mission statement. So it's 95% of people have never gone through this. So there's not a lot of coaches necessarily. There are a lot of programs out there. And there's some great programs. Some of them are a little bit exhausting, I guess, in going through them. But so there's a lot of good things out there. You can even ask AI, by the way. You can ask AI and see what it comes back with. We should try that sometime.
We should.
And see how it would guide you in developing your mission statement. But one, is this important? How important is this to the coach? And then I would ask them, what was their process? Talk to me about their process in developing that mission statement or purpose statement.
Based on your research, it should follow those 4 steps, at least ballpark?
Well, and actually coming up with the identity, some of the things I'm looking for is I want that identity to be deep. And not just really shallow. So we especially see this in a business when you see a mission statement that's primarily defined by like profit and just by a product. People don't want to work for shallow companies. And profit's important, right? Product and performance and all those things are important, but people want to work for something that's more transcendent and deep. And so you want to see mission statements that hit to the deeper dimensions. Simon Sinek, talks about that in his Start With Why book and famous talk on his TED Talk. And there's a reason why getting down to that deeper layer into the why is important, because it's very powerful. Our why, when you look at pretty much any research on motivation and doing great things, our greatest motivations, our deepest motivations, strongest motivations come from our purpose and from our meaning. And so finding a coach that's going to be aware of some of those kinds of elements, that an identity should be deep. I believe that we can come up with a pretty universal identity statement for ourselves. At least that's the goal. I don't want to have a separate mission statement for when I'm at work, or separate identity, and then have to change when I'm at home. Because I think we can find a convergence in who we are. Maybe I'm using a different skill set at work than I am at home, but the essence of who we are, I think, especially as we get older, we start to see some really powerful things in there. So I would want a deep identity. I would hope for a unified or integrated identity that's applicable across the board. Often, a lot of personal mission statements are focused just on the profession. Well, then when I get home, who am I? I don't know. I'm just like any other dad or whatever. So having a more unified look at who I am, so I can be the same person with my wife, with my kids, with my friends, at church, at work, all those places. That's the goal. It may not be possible for everybody, but that's kind of the goal to get to. Yeah.
What's your experience? You've been doing this for several years now. What is your experience with people starting to see change? Like, is it something, I'm going to be more integrous starting tomorrow?
Yeah.
Or is this, you mentioned earlier in your study, it was a 9-month period. Is there... Obviously, if we really want to see change in something, we could start to see a little bit of change. Like if I go to the gym tomorrow and I haven't been in 5 years, well, that's a change.
Right.
But I may not see that in the measure of my arms or legs or waist or whatever for some number of weeks or months. Do you see, like, if people are going to commit to this path, one, it's probably a lifelong thing, as you kind of alluded to earlier. Right. But is there kind of a minimum, like, don't get upset with yourself if you're trying to tackle an anger problem and you lose your temper, 5 times in the next 2 weeks? Or
yeah, so I think in business, because generally professionals listening to this podcast, most of us have heard of things like SMART goals. And we've got these tools that we use in the workplace to take vague or really big picture kind of things and get them all drilled all the way down to, okay, so what do we do now? And there's a couple really important principles in that and we saw it in Ben Franklin's approach. We can't tackle the whole spectrum of character all at once. In the same way, we can't tackle our entire strategic plan all at once. We know we don't multitask as humans. And that's a fallacy to think that we can actually multitask. And so we need to bring things into focus. So we need to work on one thing at a time. And I think it's one reason why it's important to have a clear framework. And also understand, some of the metrics or the dimensions or areas of our life. So I didn't mention this before. I can have high integrity in one part of my life at work. I could have very high integrity, and like I would go through lots of embarrassment at work in order to have integrity. But then maybe at home, not have any integrity or have some big gaps in there. And so I think it's important, the assessment part is an important first step. What do I want to tackle first? Or do I want to be like Ben Franklin, just like, well, I've got 7 values or 4 values or things, and I'm just going to rotate through them. And like I'm doing leg day on Monday, I'm doing chest on Wednesday. Right? That's a fine approach too. You just systematically, whatever it is, we're systematically going through these things, but it has to get down into behavior. Until our values reach our behavior, it's not character, right? Nobody says, no, I don't believe in integrity, or I don't believe in love. Pretty much universally, people believe that those are important values, but none of us live it out all the time. And so what are ways now, techniques to change my behavior in this? Is there a habit that I have to undo? Is there a false belief? Is there a fear? Is there an anxiety that's keeping me from this? And so I think a lot of the recovery world, 12 steps and those things offer a lot of great insight. First I've got to admit there's a gap. I've got a problem. I might need to bring God into the picture, right? And bring in the higher power. I might have to go clean up some messes. There's something powerful in going clean up a mess. Going into your team at work or at home. Hey kids, I'm sorry. I lost my temper. I don't want to do that. I'm working on it. Please forgive me. I can't promise you that I'll never lose my temper again, but I can promise you that I'm going to keep working on it, and I invite you to be part of it. All right, so it's a big courage moment, big vulnerable thing to step out. Takes a lot of humility to do something like that, to invite other people into your mess and into the area that you need to grow in. But the research shows that as we do that, as we bring people into it, as we bring people who love us, care about us, want us to grow and develop, that's a really important step in bringing that accountability in, the feedback, 360 feedback, and those things. So I want to grow in this, and what's my plan? What's my SMART goal over the next 90 days? What do I need to do? And it may be I need to go read a book. I don't know what to do. Okay, so first step is fine to go do some research. Hey, I need to break this habit. What do I need to go do? I don't want to be a procrastinator anymore. I need to go become an expert in it. And I think that's one of the things is we it's not just try harder. Like that's not a good plan. Just try. I messed up. Just try harder. That's not a great plan. We don't do that in business. Like, we just got to try hard. Well, we do, but it's not a great. That's not a great way to strengthen a business or to have a great business. Just try harder. It's yes, trying is important in there, but one of the definitions of insanity is keep doing the same thing over and over again, hoping you get a different result, right? So. Those are some important next steps. This is an area I need to grow because I've got a clear framework. Here's some next steps. Maybe I need to go research something, read something, interview somebody, talk to somebody who I admire in this. Go have some proactive modeling. I really like the way that person always gets stuff done. What do they do? How do they manage their calendar? Do they make to-do lists? What book changed their life with that? Have they always been like that? What was their path? What was their journey? Did something work for them? It may not work for me, but now I'm moving down this path. But it goes back to hanging on, like with tenacity, who I know I really should be. And I think as a person of faith, this has a special meaning when somebody who is born again has become a new creation, and we believe that we are free from sin because Jesus took our sin, yet and we're no longer a slave to sin, yet we still end up falling into sin. And so that is another way to talk about character growth and character formation. As soon as I stop believing that I really am a new creation and I revert back to believing, I guess I am just a sinner. I guess maybe that wasn't real. Now I've lost all the power over getting out of that, fixing that. I've basically put chains back on. I've put the cuffs back on. I've become a slave to that thing again. So that identity is something you have to keep going back to, and operating from that. We see that when we put on uniforms in certain areas. You know, when you put on a uniform in the military service, there's like this different behavior. People stand up differently. So I think we can look at even things like that where we lean into our identity, who we're supposed to be, and don't let our behaviors keep speaking who we are. Let our identity speak who we are, and persist in undoing the behaviors that shouldn't be there and pursuing the ones that should.
Final thoughts for this episode?
Well, I think be encouraged that it is absolutely possible to develop our character. And not only is it possible, we should. And this should be something that every human, I believe, every human should be pursuing a life of character. And it's one of those things, there's so much joy, there's so much reward in living out this life of character. So it's worth pursuing. A lot of the fruit that comes from it are the things that we value the most. Our close relationships are so much stronger, and our close relationships depend on character. Right? If you ask my wife, do you prefer, or are you going to, do you prioritize Brent's skills or Brent's character? Which is most important to you? If you had to give up one, you know, which would you keep? And we know every spouse is going to say, no, I'm hanging on to character. Right? Character is the most important to me. Right? I can put up with some crummy pancakes and bad cooking. It's the character that I really value the most. And it's true in every valuable relationship at work. It's true in our free society. Right? So everything relies on this character. So it's worth pursuing. And but it takes intention. Character is an uphill thing in the same way that strength is an uphill. Like, nobody just gets stronger by sitting here. The only way to get stronger is to go through resistance, to go through challenge, to go through difficulty. Like, to get my muscle stronger, there is no other way for it to get stronger except to push through resistance and to push through more than I could before. It's always pushing against that edge, and I think our character is the same way. So it takes courage. I talked about humility at first, but it also takes courage to pursue it. So there's encouragement, and yes, it's possible, but there's a little bit of soberness in that. It does take courage to pursue a life of character.
Awesome. Well, Brent, thanks for your time, your words of wisdom, as always, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of A Leader's Journey podcast. If you enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up, and remember to subscribe to our channel.